Our reading today, which is printed in your bulletin, this time in the right version, thank you, Stephen, we're making it work, is a reading from John chapter 11, starting in verse 17. Listen now for what God is saying to our church. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Mary and Martha to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." And Jesus said, "Your brother will rise again." Moving to verse 30. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man kept this man from dying?" This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. If you have spent any time with kids, you probably know that they do this often and mildly annoying thing where they find a movie that they love and they just watch it over and over and over and then over again. So when I was a kid, the movie that I watched over and over again was this very probably low-budget TV film called Rookie of the Year. Now luckily for my parents, it wasn't a sing-along, which is great because my brother and I are terrible singers, and that would have been bad for everyone. But I also wouldn't exactly call it a great cinematographic masterpiece. But it was the movie we came back to I came back to, and my brother just tagged along because I was older and told him what to do. The story of this movie was about a 12-year-old named Henry, and he loved baseball, which I related to because I also loved baseball. And one day he breaks his arm, and then when it heals, it does this weird thing where it kind of gets like, and he can throw a baseball like super fast. And then one thing leads to another, as they do in these kind of movies. Before you know it, Henry is the starting pitcher for the Chicago Cubs. What an unexpected hero. A 12-year-old playing for the Cubs? I was so into this story. I loved it. Because I think there's something about unexpected, heroic moments that draw us in. Even if the movie is low budget, we want to see 12-year-olds win the big game, right? Most of us love a story with a hero. For the stories that really move us, that draw us in, well, those are the stories where the hero is someone unexpected, or the heroic moment we didn't see coming. I think today's story has both of those elements. Heroes that are unexpected, and a heroic moment that no one saw coming. So let's set the stage here. Jesus gets a call, probably not on his iPhone, that his beloved friend Lazarus has been very sick. And now everyone expects Jesus to drop what he's doing and come and save Lazarus. But in a move that confuses everyone, Jesus waits until after Lazarus has died to show up. And when he finally arrives on the scene, things are rather chaotic. People are weeping, People are consumed with guilt. The house of Mary and Martha is filled with people who have come to grieve with them. Really picture the scene. Hear the sounds of the weeping. Feel the chaos of people running around making preparations. And then sense the thick tension in the air when the one person who could have prevented this death arrives. That's quite a scene, isn't it? I think that when we read the story of Lazarus raising from the dead, we often skip this part of the story, and we get right to where the miracle happens, because we think that's the big moment. But I actually think this is the heart of the story. And in this moment, a moment that we often skip, we see some of the bravest acts in all of the gospel. If you have a Bible that you're looking at, there's a good chance that this story is under the heading, Jesus Raises Lazarus, or something along those lines. But perhaps a better title for this story should be The Brave Confessions of Mary and Martha. When Martha meets Jesus, before he can even greet her, she says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." I mean, when you think about it, it's a bold accusation to make to the Savior of the world, to God in flesh. Hear the anger in her words. Hear the desperation. Hear the grief. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." It's like she's saying, you completely let me down. In the moment I needed you the most, you didn't show up. The honesty of her hurt in this moment, it's almost uncomfortable. It makes us cringe. Like, excuse me, do you know who you're talking to? And then, in the next breath, she says, "Even now, I know that God will give whatever you ask of him." I find this to be a disorienting thing for her to say. Like, pick a lane, Martha. Are you mad? Are you sad? How can you say that you have such faith when just 1 second ago you were giving Jesus the shakedown? But then I think to my own lived experience and the lived experience of others, and I'm willing to bet your lived experience. And what I know is that I am a complicated person with a wide range of emotions at any given moment. When I think back to my own moments of grief, my heart was filled with so many emotions: sadness, confusion, anger, but also the sweet comfort of memories, the warmth of community, the presence of God. And so when we think, what does it mean to mourn together as a community? Remember, we can hold a wide range of experiences and feelings. Just as Martha was holding grief and hope at the same moment, we too hold many things in our hearts. And Jesus doesn't say to Martha, "Hey, I liked the part where you said you have faith in me, but I didn't really care for the part where you yelled at me." No. Jesus holds all of Martha in his heart. And then they get into this logistical conversation about resurrection and what's going to happen next, and we didn't read that part, but there's some confusion about what does he mean, what's going on, and before they can really even come to a solid conclusion, Mary arrives on the scene, followed by her brother's religious friends. And she meets Jesus with the same accusation, but this time with an audience. "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." I like to imagine that there's a brief pause here, a moment where everyone is holding their breath, looking at each other, waiting to see how Jesus would respond. "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." And before Jesus can even answer, Mary begins to weep again. In this moment, you have to consider the fact that Mary, like Martha, acts boldly. Dare I say heroically? She, a woman, names grief and anger to Jesus, a man, in a very public way. Given the society, This is an empowered move. This is insanely brave. And so there Jesus is, standing next to Mary and Martha, and then he too begins to weep. It's almost easy just to pass this over, to move right to the moment where Jesus sweeps in and fixes everything. But I actually think this is the climax of the story. This is the heroic moment no one saw coming. Because Jesus could have easily, right then and there, done his Jesus thing and raised Lazarus from the dead, and everyone would have cheered. He could have fixed it immediately. But instead, he does something else. He shows great vulnerability. And well, that is courageous. He is completely present to the suffering of his community, and that is heroic. Jesus showed his most vulnerable, most human side in this moment. In fact, when the Jewish leaders say, "See how he loved Lazarus," the Greek word that they use for love here isn't the expected agape, which translates to God's love. The Greek word is actually philos, meaning brotherly love, the love you share between a friend. Jesus' love in this moment exposes himself in a way that is risky and daring. He knew that the leaders could easily say, "Oh wow, Jesus was supposed to be a great leader and healer, and look here, he is weeping." And some of them did. Some questioned why he didn't save Lazarus. But that's what makes this the unexpected heroic moment. Author Brené Brown has spent her career studying vulnerability, and this is what she says. Vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable. They are never weakness. Vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. That's exactly what Jesus did. He was vulnerable with his own truth, that he too was deeply moved by the hurts of his friends. And then he was courageous enough to show the side of him that wasn't the divine fixer of all things. And these acts of bravery and vulnerability that Jesus and Mary and Martha show us, well, it's what we are called to do as a faithful community. We are called to be a community that bravely holds our grief together, that makes space for mourning. During my time at Columbia Theological Seminary, our community underwent a lot of change, and that caused a lot of grief in the community. And we often gathered together to mourn and to have hard conversations. And the dean of students would often say, when we gather together, we work to create brave spaces. Now this was a play on the idea of a safe place, because we want our communities to be safe spaces, places that we feel comfortable, right? But the thing is, life is often uncomfortable. It's messy, heartbreaking, and often just downright hard. And if we have spaces that are comfortable, if we only have spaces that are comfortable, then there's no room to really mourn, to grieve, because those expressions are often uncomfortable. So what if this community that we're building together wasn't just a place where we worked hard to make sure everyone was comfortable, but we worked really hard to make it a space that everyone can be brave? What if we are a community that allows people to ask hard questions, to experience our full range of humanity, to weep, to cry out, to shake our fists, to ask the daring questions like, "Jesus, why weren't you here when I needed you?" Because we know from this story that Jesus is right there with us, weeping when we weep. And we know that just as Jesus empowered Mary and Martha to bravely confess their feelings, Jesus empowers us to do the same. And so what does this look like for our community? What what does it mean to be a community that mourns together, that is brave with our vulnerabilities? Well, it does take a lot of courage, but it's actually not that complicated. It's doing exactly what Jesus did. When Mary approached Jesus and spoke her heart, what does the text say? It says, Jesus saw her. That's it. That's what we are called to do. We are called to see each other, to really see each other, including our pains and our burdens. We are called to be present in suffering. And that's uncomfortable, isn't it? When we see someone suffering, we just want that moment to pass. But as a faithful community, we are called to be present, to sit together, to weep together. Brown says, I thought Faith would say, I'll take away the pain and discomfort. But what it ended up saying was, I'll sit with you in it. And that's it, friends. That's how we are a brave, heroic community. We are present in uncomfortable situations. We create space for the emotions that surround grief. And friends, this isn't just a nice thing to do, it's a necessary thing to do. If we want to build a community that thrives, that people can be wholly themselves, that loves deeply and cares fiercely, we must be a community that shares burdens, mourns together, and really sees each other. So this week, this month, this year, be brave, be vulnerable, and create spaces for others to be brave and to be vulnerable. And know that Jesus is right with us, loving us, caring for us, weeping with us, and celebrating with us. That we are not alone, that we have our community, and that we have our loving God with us when we mourn.